Sheila, why don't you go ahead and introduce Allison?
Okay, well, it's my pleasure to introduce Allison Bunting, who is a person who's contributed greatly to the heritage, what we know about the history and heritage of the Cienega watershed through oral history, internships and oral histories and the timeline and so forth, but also a mainstay of the Empire Ranch Foundation's programs. Allison, I think you've been president, newsletter editor, advisory council, archivist, and trained docent. So we're going to capitalize on all your experience today to learn what's going on at the historic ranch house, but we know you have much more you could say. So here's Allison.
Thank you. And thank you for inviting me to give this virtual tour of the Empire Ranch House today. The Empire Ranch House originated as a simple flat roof, 4-room house constructed of hand-cast adobe bricks between 1871 and 1874. It was located on a 160-acre homestead, and in August of 1876, it was sold by its owner, Edward Nye Fish, who had a partner named Simon Silverberg, to Walter Vail and Herbert Hislop. Walter hailed from New Jersey, and Hislop was from London, England. John Harvey, an Englishman born in Bermuda, joined the partnership 2 months later. Herbert Hislop left the partnership in 1878. And you can see from this letter he wrote to his sister that he was concerned about the neighbors, but he also had some financial issues to deal with at home. Walter's brother, Edward, known as Ned Vail, became a partner in 1879. John Harvey remained until 1881. That same year, Walter married Margaret Newhall, and she came to live at the ranch full. Walter and Margaret had 7 children, 6 of whom were born while living at the Empire Ranch. The land holdings of the ranch grew to over 100,000 acres, covering an area that stretched from the Rincon Mountains down to Patagonia. And you see these gray areas are where we have determined and confirmed that these were owned by the Empire Ranch. In 1876, Walter Vail moved his corporate headquarters and family to Los Angeles. Sadly, in 1906, Walter was killed in a streetcar accident. Vail and his heirs operated the ranch until 1928, when it was purchased by the Chiricahua Ranches Company, which was owned by Henry, Frank, and Charles Boyce. Frank Boyce, his wife Mary, and sons Frank Jr., who was known as Pancho, and Bob moved to the Empire Ranch in 1929. Frank Boyce died in 1956, and his oldest son, Pancho, became the manager of Empire Ranch ranching operations. The Boyce family sold the Empire Ranch in 1969 to Gulf American Corporation, which planned to build a large residential community development. Pancho and his son Steve Boyce continued ranching operations under agreement with GAC. In 1974, GAC sold the Empire Ranch and other land holdings they had acquired to Animax Mining Company, who were interested in the water rights and mineral potential of the lands. Animax leased the ranching rights to John Donaldson. BLM acquired ownership of the ranch house in 1988 as part of the Empire Cienega Conservation Area, which totaled over 45,000 acres. In 2000, it was redesignated as La Cienega's National Conservation Area. John Donaldson and his son Mac and grandson Sam continued their lease with the BLM until March of 2009. When Ian Tomlinson, owner and manager of the Vera Earl Ranch in Sonoyta, took over the lease agreement, and he continues in that role today. I'm now going to lead you through the sections of the ranch house, giving you a brief description of room uses and telling you a bit more about the history of the Empire Ranch. The ranch house was built in several phases, as you can see here, and we're going to start in the original 4-room structure that was built about 1871. This is the north entrance to what we call the Zaguan or breezeway area. It was the only entry into the corral that originally stood attached to the south end of the house. Stock was penned in the corral at night, and the only way for a thief or predator to reach animals was to pass the doorways where presumably Vale, Hislop, and Harvey were sleeping. A screened meat cooler stands in the shade of the hall. Sides of beef hung in the cooler during the colder months. This shallow concrete basin that you see in the south end had a wood frame draped with burlap, which was kept wet, providing evaporative cooling for milk, butter, and eggs. We're now going to go into room 1, which is the first room on the right, and it was originally used as a bedroom by Vale or Harvey or Hislop. The Boyces used this room as their supply commissary. Note the fireplace, which is the primary source of heating in this room. The round hole you see in the chimney above reflects that at some point a wood-burning stove was placed in front of the fireplace and vented through the hole. I'll explain the use of this compressor in a little bit. The room's ceiling is typical Southwestern construction. Wood beams, which are known as vigas, are crossed by 1-inch wood strips known as latillas. The original roof over this portion of the ranch house was flat and made of dirt. In the 1890s, a gable corrugated metal roof was added above the earthen roof. We're now going to go across the hall into room 3, which was originally another bedroom used by Vale or Hislop. This room was later used as the Cowboys' quarter during the Vale and Boyce era. It now contains part of the Cowboy Life exhibit, which was funded by the Arizona Humanities Council. During the late 1940s, 2 cowboys lived in this room. One had his bed in this corner, the northeast-west corner of the room, and the second had it in the south corner where you now see a closet. Now going to there's a connecting door between this room we were just in and room 6. Room 6 was originally used by Vale and Hislop as a storeroom, and then it became the Vale's company's store. But in the 1930s, the Boyces made the room into cowboy quarters, and it was used by the foreman. In this photo, you see another method of heating, a gas radiator. Natural gas came to the Empire Ranch in the 1940s when El Paso Gas built its pipeline to Tucson. The door leads to the cowboy bath, which was added around 1948. The other part of the room houses the rest of the Cowboy Life exhibit, including this wonderful old exhibit case that was originally at the Fairbank General Store. And now we're going to go back across the Zaguan into room 4, which was originally used as a kitchen, but it became the dining room for the Vale cowboys around 1878. I'm using this older photo of the cowboy dining room to show the bracing that was present in the rooms of the original ranch house prior to the 2017-18 stabilization project. Once the roof was anchored to the walls and foundations were reinforced, all the bracing was removed. Between 25 and 15 and 20 men, including cowboys and other hired help, ate their meals in here. Ranchers and other travelers to Tucson were welcome to stop for coffee or a meal. This meat refrigeration unit you see was installed in the 1950s when Tucson Electric Power finally reached the ranch. And that compressor we saw in the first room powered or provided the refrigeration for this unit. Around 1878, they began what we call the rear addition, adding additional rooms to accommodate ranching operations. We're going to take the connecting door that goes from room 4 into room 10 into what is called the cowboy kitchen. A full-time cook prepared meals for the cowboys and staff in this kitchen. And right outside this door, as you can see in this older photo, was a dinner bell that was used for meals. In this photo, I think we see Frank and Mary Boyce, Pancho and Bob Boyce with an Empire Ranch cowboy. Cooking was done on a cast iron wood-burning stove located right in front of this closed-off fireplace and next to that Hoosier cabinet. The next room we're going to visit to the south is room 11. This room was used by Walter Vail as his office while he conducted his business and political affairs. He locked his whiskey in the office safe when he was away from the ranch. The Boyce family also used this room as an office, and the safe was used to store the company's books and records. Note the nice wood flooring in this room. The maps on the display show the growth and extent of the Empire Ranch land holdings. This is the only room at the ranch house which is locked. You can only enter it during docent tours or events. Next in line is room 12, which was used by the full-time bookkeeper during the Vail era. It was also used as a guest room and a parlor by the Vails and the Boyces, and it's currently furnished as a Victorian parlor. I think that this 1880s photo of Margaret Vail was taken in this room. The ceiling in this room is much more sophisticated than the one in the original section of the house. Vails had more money and lumber was more readily available. These cloth strips you see hanging from the ceiling are evidence of a manta. Mantas consisted of some type of cloth draped under the ceiling. They were commonly used in adobe structures with earthen roofs to protect occupants from falling dirt from the roof. We're now going to step outside to the east side of the rear addition. This is an 1885 photo of the cook's wing under construction. And I want you to take a look at these doorways along here. This photo shows the same area today, and the doorways have been converted to windows. And they're the windows in the rooms we just visited. The doorways were moved to the west side. A roof has also been added over the rear hall to connect the cook's wing to the main ranch house. And then I wanted to show you this 1940s photo, which showed a covered saddle rack that existed right along the edge of the concrete area where we were just standing. We're going to take a quick look into room 18, which was used by the Vales as a pantry, but in the Boyce period, it became a laundry. In this room, we've revealed a section of the wall to show you the original adobe bricks that the house is constructed of. The green arrow points to a mud plaster that was applied to create an smooth interior wall. The red arrow points to the cement plaster that was probably applied in the 30s. The covering was thought to provide protection for adobe bricks, but the problem with cement plaster is that it traps moisture between the cement and the bricks, and that moisture can erode the adobe over time. So during the stabilization project, we removed a very large percentage of the cement plaster and replaced it with a breathable lime plaster. We're now going to spend some time in the Victorian edition of the house, which is this area right here. We believe that 3 rooms of this house, rooms 20, 22, and 23, were built by John Harvey for his bride starting about 1880. And originally, this portion of the house was not connected to the rest of the ranch house. Take a look at the front porch and the bay window in this 1920s photo of the Victorian edition. And here's the bay window area. Walter added the window as a wedding present for his Maggie. As you can see in the current photo, the porch looks much the same, but the bay window is quite different and has larger panes of glass. The Boyce family did a major remodeling of the Boyce Victorian edition in the early 50s, including this bay window. We're now standing in the living room. When the Boyces did their remodeling, the ceilings were lowered in this room, paneling was added, and this bookcase that you see to the right of the fireplace was installed to cover a doorway that led from this room into the master bedroom, which is directly behind the wall. Here's an 1880s photo that shows you that doorway. This is the living room area, and then this is the master bedroom area. Here's a view of the bay window from inside the living room. And that house you see up on the hill is called the New Ranch House. It was built in the 1950s for Pancho Boyce and his family. A timeline of the Empire Ranch history is installed on the east wall of the living room. Let's now go into room 22, which is the master bedroom. This room still has the original high ceilings and has an exhibit of the families of the Empire Ranch on its wall. The doorway you see leads to the master bathroom, which was added by the Vales in the early 1910s. And going back into the master bedroom, you can see the case here on the left is covering what was that doorway into the living room. We're now going to go into the middle room, room 23, which was used by various family members and guests. And it was also Pancho and Bob Boyce's bedroom when they were youngsters. The middle room is currently furnished with dining room furniture. The French doors on the right lead out to the sleeping porch, which we'll visit in a minute. And this doorway leads to the children's addition, which we'll visit. Here's another view of the middle room showing the doors leading into the living room and the master bedroom. Room 21, which we'll visit next, was used by the Boyce and Vale families as a dining room, and it was originally a porch, which was enclosed during the Vale era. The ceilings were lowered. Wood paneling was added by the Boyce family. These large glass windows and doors were also added in the remodeling. And through the windows, you can see the dead man bracing, which helped to hold up the walls of the ranch house before the stabilization project. And thankfully, we can we've gotten rid of all of those. In this 1930s photo, you can see a view of what that doorway to the porch or dining room area looked like. We're now going to go into room 17, the family kitchen. The Vail and Boyce family meals were prepared in this kitchen, and modernizations, including a breakfast nook and metal cabinets, were added by the Boyce family in the 50s. Next door to the kitchen is the cook's quarter in room 14, and a full-time cook who prepared meals for the Vails lived in this room. During the Boyce period, it was turned into a kitchen pantry. We're now going to visit the children's addition, which includes rooms 24 through 28. This is the only section of the ranch house which is not constructed of adobe. Room 25 is a large L-shaped bedroom used by the Vail children. That door you see straight ahead leads outside to the stone corral area. You access the bedroom from the middle room, and the door at the right is leading into a large cedar closet that Ed Vail used at one time as his darkroom. And we have children's toys on display in this room. Adjacent to the bedroom is room 26, which was a bathroom, and it still has an original zinc bathtub. And then next door is room 27, which was a guest room, or it was a bedroom for the children's nanny or governess. And at one time, Steve Boyce's wife, Annie, used it as her sewing room. The Vails converted the original small porch on the children's addition, which is room 28, into a sleeping porch in the 1920s. The building you can see to the south through the screen is the adobe hay barn. Here you can see how the adobe wall of the middle room was connected or attaches to the wood frame of the children's addition. We're now going to go outside and take a quick look at the areas surrounding the ranch house. On the east side is what we call the family landscape. Unfortunately, we cannot currently maintain the lush types of gardens which the families installed, especially Mary Boyce, who was an avid gardener. So I'm going to show you a series of photos of what it looked like in the 1950s. This is the arbor area, which was south of the master bathroom and west of the sleeping porch. The Boyces installed a swimming pool, and then Mary Boyce at one time experimented with a cactus garden, but as the trees matured, it was later replaced with grass. Across the yard area from the ranch house is the Huachuca House, which we now use as our visitor contact station. This house was moved to the ranch from Fort Huachuca to become a house for Bob and Miriam Boyce. Here's a better view of the new ranch house that I mentioned earlier. On the east side of the ranch house is what we call the working landscape, and this is a view of the house corral. Here's another view. The stone corral you see here has been used for over a century on this working ranch. The Vails used it for their stallion, and the Boyces primarily used it for storage of wood or other materials. This concrete block you see supported a pump engine that was used to cut wood. Here you can see how the stone corral attaches to the children's addition and that escape route that the children could use to get out of the house unnoticed. Here's the tack room, which was used to store saddles, packs, and other equipment for carrying of horses. And this small corral area here used to have a snubbing post in the middle of it, and it's called the breaking corral. The ranch house is open at all times for self-guided tours, so if you haven't been there in a while, please visit. And now I'm available for questions.
I think I'm unmuted. I think I am.
Now you are, yes.
Yeah, Allison, I can think of all kinds of uses for this program that you put together, like including visitors that go there, just like, wow. But I wanted to mention to you what a great job of showing all of the various families that live there. You know, the Vales, who we think about very often, you know, the Boyces, and you know, how it all came together and the changes, it's really in there. And that's, plus you can see how it looked at various stages. So a great job on pulling that together and a great job on pulling in those photos. They really helped us come to life.
Thank you. Thank you.
Allison, you mentioned that natural gas came in the 1940s when the pipeline was built to Tucson.
Yes.
Did they build a pipeline up to Sonoyta as well, and a spur, or was it
No,
like
not really. The only place in the Sonoyta area that has natural gas is Graterville Road.
Okay.
And that's because one of Harold Thurber, who was a rancher and had his ranch along Graterville, he wanted natural gas at his ranch, but it's never been extended any further south of Graterville.
Okay. But they did have a pipeline to the Empire Ranch then?
Yes, I think the pipeline went through Empire Ranch lands. And so at that point,
Okay.
I presumably the Boyces made a deal with them that
Sure.
put it through, but you provide us with ranch for the house.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just intrigued by it, like, because that's, yeah. Yeah.
Sheila can tell you horror stories about the pipeline.
Yes. Yes, the first day I was acting assistant manager, someone almost lost their life because it blew up. But he didn't. And he just retired very recently from the BLM, but it was horrible.
Well, he dug into it by mistake, right?
Yes, yes, yes. And
There's
then
a reason it's called Blue Stake.
well, the concussion, you know, it was lower than it should have been because of soil erosion. Concussion of when he hit it threw him off his equipment way beyond it. May have saved his life.
Allison, I have a question.
Sure.
You mentioned Fish and Silverberg were the original investors, but you jumped over them fairly quickly. I don't know if that's because you don't have much information about them or because they weren't that significant, but I just wondered what the original motivation and a little bit more about them and what was happening, you know, contextually here in Southern Arizona at the time that they were interested in the property.
Well, Fish was a businessman in Tucson, and he was also noted for all kinds of land deals. So he actually got his brother-in-law, a man named William Wakefield, to file the homesteading papers for that 160-acre section. And Wakefield did the basic developments like the house. And then I think it was around June of 1876, Wakefield sold the homestead to Fish and Silverberg for $500. And then in August, they sold it to Vail and Hislop for about $2,000. So there was a lot of that kind of land speculation going on with people filing homestead claims or paying people to file homestead claims, prove them up, and then they would sell them for $500 to whoever was funding it.
And what was the native presence at the time? Was there much of a native community down that area?
Not in the period of time when we're talking about with Vail coming in. Of course, there was a lot of Apache raiding going on at that period of time. Sheila will probably answer more about the very early native.
Yeah, according to our timeline information, folks that might have used the area had already moved toward Tucson or San Javier, mainly because of other tribal pressures, raiding and so forth. But the Apache were definitely in that area. It would have been incredible grazing land when the early, Keno missions were set up. So we probably was in use, but then people kind of moved out.
Yeah.
And the Empire Ranch was never directly affected by Apache raids. Some people credit the design of that original ranch house as providing a fair amount of protection. Vail family lore says that the local natives were kind of afraid of Walter Vail. I'm not sure that that was really true, but although they lost some stock out in pasture areas, they never had any attacks directly on the ranch house.
I have another question for you, Allison, but I don't want to take up too much time. But you showed some of the outbuildings that exist now. Which kind of buildings are no longer there? They got removed or burnt down or whatever?
Well, there were certainly there's a couple of barns that we can see used to be there that aren't. And then there was a big bunkhouse that was in the corral area. It would have been on this side of the corral, and that's where a lot of the cowboys lived. That burned down. There was a big fire at the ranch around 1911, and we finally found some documentation of that in the Tucson papers. Fortunately, there were some soldiers from Fort Huachuca who were camping on their overnight. They were traveling back to the fort, and they helped to fight the fire, but there were a lot of wood structures that were along the east side of the corral that burned down at that time.
Okay.
That could be a whole nother talk, all the buildings. And actually, Robin Pinto has a very interesting talk where she talks about her belief that, if you remember that first illustration I showed, that Hislop, that drawing that he did of the ranch, she believes that a lot of the rear addition and everything were all built on the foundations of that corral wall. It was an adobe wall. And so she had a very interesting presentation using photos on how she thinks various buildings came and went at the ranch house.
Well, I
Allison?
have another question, but if somebody else does?
Yeah, real quick one. Do you
Yeah.
have any information on if we're going to have work parties in the near future?
We're waiting for BLM to come up with the safety plans for us to be able to do that. And I'm hopeful that maybe within the next month or so, we'll be able to do some.
Thank you.
Well, that was my question, almost, is what future work do you see happening there in the way of stabilization or exhibits?
In mostly the things that we have on tap for the ranch house area itself is we want to interpret the tack room and make that more available to the public to be able to look into it. We've used it a lot for storage, and we're hoping that we can have some nice interpretive exhibits in there. A dream is that a major project is that we be able to do work on the new ranch house, which I mentioned earlier. It's currently closed up for safety reasons, but the foundation has been working with the BLM on an agreement that if the foundation can raise the funds to renovate the house, then it will become available for use by the foundation, probably for office or meeting space. But there are 3 bedrooms at this end of the house, which in the past have been used for scientists, you know, spending the night, that kind of thing. So we're hopeful that we'll be able to put that structure to use.
You know, I forget what the act was called, but right earlier this summer, the Congress and President signed an act sort of increasing renovation funds and infrastructure funds for parks. And I guess interior as a whole. Are any of those funds available for that sort of a renovation, or?
I don't believe so, Sheila.
No. We don't have a complete plan for interior, but what I've read so far emphasizes existing trails and recreational facilities for parks, Fish and Wildlife, and BLM. So it's going to be a shared pot of money, and emphasizing more of the recreational approach than the restoration approach. But I'd like to be wrong.
That would be nice, yeah.
Yeah, no, understood. And, you know, it's always surprised me that the facility could be available for things for rental, or like you're noting, for scientists.
Yes.
So, you know, having more watchful eyes out there on a regular basis wouldn't be a bad idea.
Right. And Chris Schrager, who's the historic preservationist for BLM, for the Empire Ranch, he's wanted to institute something like the Forest Service's Room with a View.
Right.
There's the little Grove House, which is further down, you know, really close to Empire Gulch, which would have been kind of a neat place for birders to rent, that kind of thing. But hopefully, if we're able to do this renovation, we can do it in this house.
Yeah. Cool. Any other questions for people? It really was a very nice tour, and the thing I've always liked about touring it in person when I've been there is sort of you get this sense of the historical shift as additions are made, as upgrades are made, that you get this idea of how the ranch is changing, but how the people who live there are changing, and they're sort of upgrading into sort of more permanent settlement first, and then ultimately family and the comforts of modernity. So, yeah.
Well, I would like to say thank you so much, Allison. This was, you know, I've been there gobs of times, but you put together some notes and things in there that I went, oh, that's why they do that way, or whatever. So it's amazing how you picked up on these various little areas that could use some explanation, and you did a great job on it. And I will be posting this, but I sure hope that you find ways of sharing this to other venues. Thank you.
Yeah, hopefully we can do it. And since we can't do docent tours right now, we may try offering this until we are able to open up for tours. So it should be helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, if there are no further questions, thank you very much, Allison. I will note that our presenter in November, which will be the first Thursday in November, November the 5th, is going to be JJ Lamb, and she's going to be talking about the history of Vail. You know, details to follow. Probably when we post this video, we'll also post the initial details for that that presentation in November. So thank you very much, Allison, and thank you all for coming.